It happened in broad daylight. A Wednesday afternoon in the middle of summer. Children playing outside. Neighbors watching from doorways and lawn chairs. The sun is sitting high and heavy over a quiet apartment complex in Bowling Green, Kentucky, pouring down the kind of warmth that slows everything to a gentle, unhurried pace. The world was moving at its slow, familiar, trusted rhythm. And then, in the space of a few seconds, a 7-year-old girl disappeared. Not in the dark. Not in the middle of the night. Not while everyone was sleeping or distracted or looking somewhere else entirely. She disappeared in broad daylight, in front of multiple witnesses, outside her own front door. Adults saw it happen. Children saw it happen. And not a single person standing in that parking lot was able to stop it. Not because they didn't try. Not because they didn't care. But because it happened so impossibly, terrifyingly fast that by the time the brain processed what the eyes had just seen, the van was already gone. Her name was Morgan Jade Violi. She was 7 years old. She had sandy hair and a personality twice her size. Her father said she walked around like she was 15 instead of 7. Her first-grade teacher remembered her as the boldest child in the room. She had a dirt bike she loved to ride, a parking lot she considered her personal domain, and a whole enormous life stretched out ahead of her that she would never get to live. What happened to her on the 24th of July, 1996, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, would haunt an entire community for nearly 3 decades. It would keep investigators awake at night across multiple generations of law enforcement. It would follow one family through 30 years of grief and waiting and the particular kind of hope that never quite lets go even when everything around it tells it to. And then, nearly 3 decades later, a single strand of hair collected from inside a stolen van spoke. The science that had not existed when that hair was first recovered finally caught up to it. And what it said was not just a name. It was an answer. A long overdue reckoning with a man who had spent 29 years breathing the air that Morgan Violi could no longer breathe. This is her story. And every chapter of it matters. If you are new here, subscribe to Cold Case, Solved Files right now, not at the end, right now. Hit that notification bell. Like this video before we go any further. Because Morgan Jade Violi's story deserves every single pair of eyes and every single heart it can reach. Now let us go back to where it all began. Morgan Jade Violi came into this world on the 3rd of November, 1988, in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The youngest of 3 daughters born to Glenn and Stacy Violi, a working-class family doing what working-class families do everywhere, building something small and real and stable out of whatever they are given, and loving each other fiercely inside the life they have made. They lived at the Colony Apartments on Shive Lane, a tight-knit community where neighbors knew each other, knew each other's children, knew who belonged in the parking lot and who didn't. That parking lot functioned as an informal commons, a space where children gathered naturally, forming the shifting, organic social clusters of kids given the freedom to simply be together. Morgan, by every account, thrived in that environment. She was not shy. She was not the kind of child who hung back near the doorway waiting to be invited in. She was bold, confident, and completely certain that the world was interesting and that she was entitled to explore all of it. Her teacher remembered one detail most vividly: Morgan was the only child in her entire first-grade class brave enough to participate in the school talent show. Not reluctantly. Not with the pale, determined courage of someone overcoming fear. With the easy confidence of someone who simply doesn't understand what there is to be afraid of. She loved her dirt bike. She loved being outside. She loved people, drawn to connection and conversation and the social life of her little community with an enthusiasm that adults twice her age couldn't always match. She stepped into each day completely open, extending herself toward the world without reservation. That openness. That beautiful, courageous, completely innocent openness. That is what made her so profoundly vulnerable on the one afternoon when the world turned on her without warning. The 24th of July, 1996, was a Wednesday. Morgan was not supposed to go outside that afternoon. Her mother Stacy was inside managing the household, operating under the entirely reasonable assumption that the parking lot was exactly what it had always been, a safe, familiar space where her children could exist without danger. But Morgan slipped outside anyway. The way children do. Because her sisters were out there, and it was summer, and that was reason enough. She was seen walking across the parking lot with her 6-year-old friend, Destiny Miller. 2 little girls in the sun on a Wednesday afternoon. Nobody watching them had any possible way of knowing what was about to happen. What came next took only seconds. A maroon van, a 1978 Chevrolet, rolled into the Colony Apartments complex without urgency, without drama, without anything that would mark it as different from any other vehicle pulling into a parking lot on an ordinary afternoon. It stopped. The door opened. A white male stepped out. He appeared to be in his mid-20s. Slender build. Sandy or light brown hair to collar length. A mustache and partial beard. And a nose that witnesses would return to again and again in the hours that followed because it was sharp and distinctive and the feature of his face that stayed with them most. He moved toward the 2 girls. He reached for Destiny first. She pulled free. She ran. Destiny Miller survived that afternoon because her instincts were faster than his hands. Morgan did not run. Multiple witnesses standing in that parking lot on that summer afternoon watched as the man grabbed Morgan Violi, forced her toward the van, pushed her into the passenger side, walked around to the driver's side, got in, and drove away. Just like that. In the time it takes to tell it. She was there and then she was gone, and the parking lot that had been a playground a moment before became something else entirely. Law enforcement responded immediately. Local police, then state authorities, then the FBI, because the evidence of a kidnapping likely to cross state lines brought federal jurisdiction into play. Roadblocks were established. A be on the lookout alert was issued. Witnesses were separated and interviewed carefully. A composite sketch was assembled and put into circulation. White male. Mid-20s. Slender. Sandy hair of collar length. Mustache, partial beard. That sharp, distinctive nose. Then came the detail that transformed the entire shape of the investigation. The van had been stolen. The night before Morgan's abduction, someone had taken that maroon Chevrolet from Dayton, Ohio, and driven it across state lines into Kentucky. This was not opportunistic. This required planning. This required a person who had decided in advance what he was going to do and had taken deliberate steps to make himself harder to trace. The Colony Apartments sat near a major interstate. The proximity to a highway system that could move a vehicle out of Kentucky and into multiple surrounding states within an hour was almost certainly not coincidental. 2 days after Morgan was taken, on the 26th of July, the maroon van was found abandoned at a truck stop in Franklin, Tennessee. The driver was gone. There was no sign of Morgan. Investigators processed the van thoroughly, collecting every piece of trace evidence they could find. Fibers. Hairs. Physical material that might someday help them identify who had been inside. They stored everything carefully, because the forensic science of 1996 could not yet answer every question they needed answered. But someday, they believed, it would. On the 20th of October, 1996, a woman walking on her rural property in Robertson County, Tennessee, found skeletal remains near an old barn. The confirmation came. It was Morgan Jade Violi. Near her remains, investigators found one more piece of her. A small yellow beret. The one she had been wearing in her hair when she walked across that parking lot with Destiny on a Wednesday afternoon. A small, ordinary hair clip of the kind every little girl in the 1990s owned by the handful. Sitting there in the leaves near that old barn, it was the detail that made everything irreversibly, heartbreakingly real. Morgan Jade Violi was laid to rest at Bowling Green Garden Cemetery. Her funeral was held at Eastwood Baptist Church. More than 500 people came. Everything was draped in purple, because purple was Morgan's favorite color, and because even in the worst grief imaginable, the people who loved her wanted to get her right. She was 7 years old. She should have been starting second grade. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with, "I'm still here," or tell us where in the world you are watching from. Because Morgan's story is about to turn in a direction that none of us could have predicted. Stay with us. The case remained open through the rest of the 1990s, into the 2000s, through the first decade of the new millennium, and beyond. The FBI never stopped working it. The $25,000 reward stayed on the table. The composite sketch continued to circulate. Periodic evidence reviews were conducted as technology advanced and new tools became available. And in the evidence storage rooms where the materials from the 1996 investigation sat carefully catalogued and preserved, something was waiting. A single strand of hair, collected from inside the stolen maroon van in the summer of 1996. In that year, the DNA technology available to investigators could not extract a full, workable profile from a single degraded hair sample without a root attached. So the hair sat in storage. And it waited. It waited while science evolved around it. It waited while forensic laboratories developed new techniques for extracting genetic material from increasingly small and degraded samples. It waited while the databases grew from modest beginnings into comprehensive resources covering millions of entries. It waited through the 5th anniversary of Morgan's death, and the 10th, and the 15th, and the 20th. It waited through every moment when her family must have wondered if they would ever know. And then the laboratory reopened the box. Advancements in forensic DNA analysis had reached the point where evidence that had previously been beyond the reach of the science could now be meaningfully examined. The hair from the van was submitted for retesting using modern methods. Scientists worked the sample with tools that hadn't existed when it was first collected. And the result was extraordinary. A full DNA profile emerged from a single strand of hair that had been sitting in evidence storage for the better part of 3 decades. Investigators ran that profile through available databases. They followed the genetic trail wherever it led. It led them to a name they had never encountered anywhere in the case file. Robert Scott Froberg. On the 27th of February, 2026, 29 years, 7 months, and 3 days after Morgan was taken from that parking lot, federal authorities stood before the cameras and made the announcement. They had their man. What investigators found when they began building the complete picture of Robert Scott Froberg was not the portrait of an ordinary man who had done one terrible thing. It was the portrait of a predator whose history of violence and escape stretched back years before Morgan's name entered the story. At the time of Morgan's abduction, Froberg was a convicted criminal in his late 20s, sentenced to 40 years in an Alabama prison for robbery. On the 3rd of April, 1996, roughly 3.5 months before Morgan was taken, he escaped. He simply walked out of custody and disappeared into the country. He surfaced in Pennsylvania, where law enforcement found him inside a child's treehouse, attempting to interact with a young boy who lived in the home. The boy ran to his parents. His parents called police. Froberg was arrested. And then, with the audacity of someone who treats consequences as obstacles rather than deterrents, he escaped again. A second time. He walked away from custody a second time and resumed moving through the country with no one able to say reliably where he was or what he was doing. On the 16th of July, 1996, exactly 8 days before Morgan was taken, Froberg arrived in Dayton, Ohio. His parents lived there, less than half a mile from a parked 1978 maroon Chevrolet van. He stole it. He drove it south across state lines, into Kentucky, to Bowling Green, to Shive Lane, to the Colony Apartments, to that parking lot on that Wednesday afternoon. And he did what he had come to do. When federal investigators sat across from Froberg with a full DNA match in front of them, he confessed. He told them he had seen Morgan and Destiny walking across the parking lot from inside the van and had made a decision. He stopped. He got out. He grabbed for Destiny first, and she pulled away and ran. He then seized Morgan, forced her into the vehicle, and drove away from the Colony apartments. He told them what happened as he drove. Morgan fought him. A 7-year-old girl, alone in a van with a man who had escaped prison twice and had already been found in a child's treehouse, fought him. She screamed. She resisted him with everything she had, because she was the girl who performed in the school talent show and rode her dirt bike and walked around like she was 15. She was not quiet in the face of what was being done to her. She was exactly who she had always been. And he killed her. He drove into Tennessee, to Robertson County, to the old barn on North Swift Road. He left her body there, less than 100 feet from the road. He disposed of her clothing deliberately, understanding that physical evidence created connections and connections led to arrests. He then abandoned the van at the truck stop in Franklin, Tennessee, and moved on. He was arrested again on the 21st of August, 1996, approximately 4 weeks after Morgan's abduction. He has remained in custody ever since, working through what remained of his Alabama sentence, while the strand of hair he left behind in a stolen van waited patiently in an evidence box to tell the truth about him. Prison records showed he had been scheduled for parole eligibility in 2028. He would have been released. He would have walked back into the world carrying the secret of what he had done. He will not be getting that parole. Federal charges have now been filed against Robert Scott Froberg for the murder of Morgan Jade Violi. Federal charges carry federal consequences, and the federal prison system does not offer parole. If convicted, he faces either the remainder of his natural life in a federal penitentiary or the death penalty. The DNA evidence, combined with his own confession, represents a formidable case. What do you say at the end of a story like this one? There is a powerful and completely human instinct to find resolution in the arrest and the charges and the confession. To let justice function as closure. But the truth is more complicated than that. It is always more complicated than that. Justice does not return what was stolen from Morgan Jade Violi. It does not give back her second-grade year, or her third, or any of the decades that should have followed. It does not give Glenn Violi back his youngest daughter. It does not give her sisters back the sibling they grew up without. It does not erase a single day of the 29 years this family carried their grief forward without any answer for why it had happened or who had caused it. And yet justice gives something real. It gives a name. It gives the specific, proven, legally recognized truth that what happened to Morgan was not an unknowable act of a chaotic universe. It was a crime, committed by a man, and that man has been identified, charged, and has confessed. The world now knows, officially and permanently, who he is and what he did. For a family that spent 29 years without that knowledge, that is not a small thing. Morgan Jade Violi was born on the 3rd of November, 1988. She was the youngest. She was the bold one. The sassy one. The one who rode her dirt bike and performed in the talent show and walked around like she was 15. She died in the summer of 1996 at the hands of a man who had no right to be anywhere near her. She was found in a Tennessee field 3 months later, with a yellow beret beside her. She was buried in purple. 500 people came to say goodbye. And for 29 years, the question of who had taken her went unanswered, while her family carried that absence forward through every single day of those 3 decades. A strand of hair answered them, finally. Collected in the summer of 1996 by investigators who preserved it carefully because they understood that someday the science would be ready even if it was not ready yet. That discipline, that commitment to completeness and to possibility, is what ultimately brought justice to this case. It is what brought the name Robert Scott Froberg to a family who deserved it 30 years ago. He had not escaped. He had only been waiting, without knowing it, for the science to be ready. That is the lesson Morgan's case carries into every cold case that is still open, every evidence box still sitting in storage, every family still waiting for an answer the current moment cannot provide. The evidence does not expire. The truth does not disappear. Science will catch up. Do not stop preserving. Do not stop asking. Morgan Jade Violi deserved to grow up. She deserved to find out who she was going to be. And every signal she gave the world in the 7 years she had pointed towards someone remarkable. She was never forgotten. And now, at last, neither will the truth be forgotten. Before you go anywhere, do 3 things. Subscribe to Cold Case, Solved Files right now, because this is where the forgotten are found, and this channel only reaches the people who need these stories if you help it grow. Hit the like button, because every like tells the algorithm that cases like Morgan's deserve to travel further. And share this video, because every share is another witness to the truth of what happened to a 7-year-old girl in a parking lot in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and to the 29 years her family waited, and to the strand of evidence that finally told the world what it needed to know. She spent nearly 30 years waiting for justice. The least we can do is make sure the world knows it arrived. Morgan Jade Violi. Say her name.